I lay there, weaker than I'd ever felt, my body sinking deeper into my dying hospital bed. Daniel, my husband, was by my side, and my little sister, Claire, held my hand. They were my only family. They looked devastated, and I felt special that they had both left everything behind to be with me in these final moments. Please, take care of each other when I'm gone, I begged them. Claire gave a shuddering nod, and Daniel answered, We will, Alina. I smiled, satisfied, and then I died. Or at least I thought I did. I felt myself rising, not my body, but my spirit. Daniel and Claire stood over my body. I expected to see sorrow, maybe tears, but instead, they laughed. Daniel shook his head and wrapped his arm around Claire's waist. Finally, he whispered, pressing his lips to hers. I was frozen in horror. Finally, Claire laughed too, swatting him playfully. You're going to ruin my makeup, she teased, wiping a pretend tear away and smirking at me. At my body. They were cheating on me. The betrayal washed over me like ice. Poor Alina, always so trusting. Claire muttered and kissed Daniel again. Rage burned through me as I watched them laughing over my dead body like it was some sick joke. I stepped forward, reaching out to slap that smug grin off Claire's face, to shove Daniel away from her. But my hand passed through them like mist. I was nothing but a ghost. I could do nothing but watch helplessly. How had it come to this? I cried. I had spent my entire life thinking only of them. I was only 8 when we lost our parents. Claire was 2, just a baby, and I took her under my wing. Every single day, I'd worked hard to make sure she had what she needed, sacrificed my own childhood to be her sister, her mother, her family. I forgave her when she'd whined, when she'd thrown tantrums, when she'd acted spoiled. I told myself it wasn't her fault. We'd had no one to guide us. She was only acting out of pain. I kept forgiving, kept making excuses, and kept taking care of her. And then, Daniel. When he came into my life, I thought I'd found someone who truly loved me, who would stand beside me and support me just as much as I had supported them. Daniel, a man with big dreams but empty pockets. He'd had nothing to his name but his charm and that smile that convinced me he was everything I'd ever wanted. I'd worked myself to the bone for him. I hadn't gone to school, hadn't had a career of my own, but I had my shop, and I put every one I earned toward helping him study for that civil entrance exam. 7 years. 7 years of pouring everything I had into making his dream come true, just waiting for the day when it would finally pay off. I dreamed of a family with Daniel, longed for the warmth of a child's laughter in our home. But somehow, Daniel never seemed to want it. Always had an excuse. Not yet, he'd say. Once I have my career going. I'd believed him, thought he was just being cautious, wanting to give us a secure life first. I trusted him, and all along, he'd been lying to me. He'd been sneaking around with my sister, and that fateful night, the night when Daniel finally passed the exam, I'd waited for them at home to celebrate. The clock ticked by, hour after hour. I'd called and texted, heart pounding with worry, thinking something terrible had happened to them. And they'd been out together, celebrating without me, laughing, drinking, alone. That night, my life was ruined. I had fainted, worried about them, and the gruesome work I'd been doing all my life finally caught up to me. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctors told me I had cancer, and I would die soon. I'd been so stupid, so blind. And now, even in death, I couldn't escape the lies that had chained me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The pain, the betrayal, it tore through me like a knife, and a scream ripped out of me. I had wasted my life. I wish I could live my life differently. I wish I could choose happiness. I wish I could live for myself. A sudden surge jolted through me, as if my very spirit had caught fire. The next thing I knew, I was gasping, choking on air, my lungs burning. My eyes shot open, and I bolted upright. I looked around wildly, my heart pounding. I expected to see Daniel or Claire, but they weren't there. In fact, this wasn't the hospital room I died in. I was in my house. I looked at the date, January 10th, 7 p.m. My heart skipped a beat. January 10th. That was the night Daniel had finally passed his exam. The night I realized I had cancer. I felt a heavy weight in my hand. My phone. I stared down at it, almost in disbelief. Just moments ago, I'd been on my deathbed, and now I was here, phone in hand, in my kitchen. The smell of the food I'd cooked filled the air, ready for a celebration I now knew would never come. But in this life, I wouldn't waste one more second. Instead of calling them over and over, letting my heart twist in knots over their silence, I grabbed my bag and hurried out. I got a cab and headed straight for the hospital. I was reborn, and I wouldn't waste my life again. As I got closer, that familiar ache crept into my chest, weakness washing over me in waves. I walked weakly toward the hospital doors, but the world began to blur, my vision tunneling. My legs gave out, and just as I stumbled forward, I crashed into something. Someone. I looked up, and I saw him. A tall, striking man in a doctor's coat, his face filled with gentle concern. I whispered, my hand reaching out to him as I fell. And then I fainted. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed again, and the doctor was sitting by my bed. He looked at me with worry. "Alina," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Are you okay?" "Who? How do you know my name?" I asked in confusion. He smiled. "You don't remember me?" And then it hit me. "Michael?" I asked, my voice a whisper. He had been the young landlord who'd owned the building where my tiny shop had back when I was just a teenager myself. Yo. He used to look at me with such quiet admiration. He'd come to see me every day, buying little things he didn't need just for an excuse to talk. I'd thought he was kind, but I'd been so wrapped up in my own worries, so focused on Claire and making ends meet, that I'd never let myself consider that he might care for me in a different way. When he'd finally confessed, I'd turned him down, too consumed with caring for my sister and putting food on our table to even think about love. Not long after that, he'd disappeared. "I left China a long time ago to finish my studies, sold the building to a friend, bought your shop so you'd never have to worry about losing it," he explained. "I came back, Alina, but I found out I was too late. You were already married to Daniel." Shame washed over me. I have led a pitiful life, haven't I? Married to a bastard and taken care of an ungrateful sister. That's why I'm here alone. "Alina, you gave everything to others, even when they didn't deserve it. You deserve more than that. You always did," Michael said. "Alina, I have to tell you something. When I checked your tests, I found something. You're in the early stages of cancer, but I know how we can treat it, so don't be afraid." I smiled. "I'm not afraid, but I can't afford treatment. Just give me some drugs I can use." Because I used all my life savings on Daniel, I didn't have any money. I was still going to die, but I decided I would die as happy as I could. Michael shook his head. "My research lab in the UK has made a breakthrough in first-stage cancer treatment. It'll take 2 months, and I'll take care of everything. The travel, the expenses. You won't have to worry about a thing, and don't even think about rejecting this offer, Alina. I can't let you die like this." I blinked my tears back. "Why would you do this for me?" His gaze held mine steadily, his voice firm but kind. "Because I want you to live, Alina. I want you to have a chance at a life you deserve. I want you to be happy." Something inside me softened at his words. Here was someone who truly cared, who had always cared. And for the first time, I thought maybe I could have that chance at happiness. "Michael," I murmured, "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know if I deserve this." "You do," he replied firmly. "More than anyone I know." What do you want in return?" I asked. He smiled at me. "Just one thing, that you live for yourself. No more sacrifices." As he said it, I felt a warmth spread through me, a tiny spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. I looked at Michael, his presence calming and steady, and I felt something else too. "Thank you," I finally whispered. The day I left China, I felt lighter than I ever had. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Daniel's texts went unanswered, Claire's calls ignored. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Michael was beside me all the way, and in the UK, my life completely changed. Michael was there for every step of my treatment, steady and compassionate. He treated me with such kindness, with such gentle strength, and bit by bit, I fell in love with him. This time, I let myself feel it fully, let myself see what it was like to be with someone who gave as much as they took, who genuinely wanted the best for me. One afternoon, I got a call from Claire and finally answered it. "Alina," she snapped. "Where have you been? I need money, and you're nowhere to be found." I'd been gone for 2 months, and she wasn't even worried. All she cared about was money. I laughed bitterly. "Why are you broke, Claire? You have a job. You should be able to support yourself by now." She was silent for a while. "Well, I don't actually have a job," she admitted hesitantly. "I lied about it." "You lied about it?" I repeated, barely able to keep the anger from my voice. Why? It was to impress someone, she replied, her tone guarded, but I knew exactly who she meant. Daniel. I laughed quietly, feeling a bitter satisfaction. All this time, Daniel had thought he was with someone better than me. But now, he'd see the truth. I ended the call and set my phone down, still reeling from Claire's confession. She was nothing but an empty shadow, and I'd spent my life trapped by her lies. But now, I was free. A few minutes later, Michael walked in, carrying a tray of food. His eyes softened as he set it down beside me, then pulled out a thin file. I have something for you, he said gently, his voice steady. I looked at him, noticing the warmth in his gaze, the kindness I'd come to know so well. What is it? He handed me the file, watching as I opened it and read the first line. Cancer-free. I looked up at him, barely able to believe it. Michael, is this real? He nodded, smiling. It's real. You've fought through the worst of it, and now you're healthy. You can return to your life. A surge of gratitude and relief washed over me, but along with it came something else. Determination. I don't want to go back to that life, not the way it had been. I want justice, to finally reclaim the power they had stolen from me. Thank you, Michael, I whispered, overwhelmed. But I don't want to go back, not like before. I want to fight back. They took everything from me, and I want it back. Michael's gaze was steady as he reached across the table, covering my hand with his. Alina, he said quietly, I'll give you everything you need. I'll give you the money, the influence, whatever it takes to make them regret what they did to you. My heart pounded hard in my chest. Why would you do that? He looked at me. Because I love you, Alina. I always have. I wanted to be there for you before, but I didn't know how. This time, I won't let you face any of this alone. Tears filled my eyes, and I could barely see him through the blur. I felt a warmth spread through me, a joy I hadn't known could exist. Michael, all this time, I never let myself love you the way I should have. But I love you too. I love you so much. His hand tightened around mine, and for the first time, I felt the fullness of a future. A life with him, a life filled with strength, with freedom. I leaned over and wrapped my arms around him, letting myself sink into his embrace. I'll be your strength, Alina, he murmured. And together, we'll make sure you get the life you've always deserved. And in his arms, I felt whole for the first time in my life. When we returned to China, we heard that Daniel and Claire were getting married that very day. We immediately went to offer our congratulations. I waited until they announced they were happily married before I stepped forward, clutching my medical report in my hand, faking tears as I stumbled closer. Daniel! Claire! I cried, letting the hurt and betrayal seep through every word. They turned to me. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed in annoyance, while Daniel looked as if he'd seen a ghost, only to quickly mask it with anger. I held up my medical report, showing I'd been fighting cancer. This is what I was battling all on my own while I worked day and night to support you both. I let my voice carry, making sure the entire room could hear. While you two were plotting behind my back, I was busy keeping food on the table, sacrificing my life for you. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. I could see people casting disgusted glances at Daniel and Claire, shaking their heads in shock. Daniel sneered. I don't want you anymore, Alina. I realized a long time ago I don't love you. 7 years and you were just convenient. That's it. The crowd gasped, shocked by his cold words. But I only felt satisfaction. Claire rolled her eyes. You always act like you're some saint, Alina. But I always get what I want. And I wanted Daniel. He has a real job now, and he's going to take care of me. Not you. I was crying on the outside, but inside I was rejoicing. They were digging their own graves, right in front of everyone. Daniel's boss stood off to the side, his face twisted in distaste. I won't have someone so heartless working in my company. You're fired, Daniel. Daniel's face went from smug to furious in an instant. He turned to me, his hand lifting as if to strike me. But before he could lay a finger on me, Michael appeared at my side, catching his wrist. Don't you dare touch her, Michael said, his voice like ice. The entire hall went silent, and I saw recognition spread through the crowd. Isn't that Michael of Azrael Hospitals? Someone whispered. The youngest, richest CEO in China? Daniel and Claire's faces paled as they realized who stood beside me. Their jealousy and confusion were plain on their faces as they looked between us. "How did you meet someone like him?" Claire stammered, disbelief coloring her voice. I just laughed. "Oh, you think I was the one who needed saving?" I said. "But now that you're married, there are a few things you should know. Daniel, did you know that Claire never actually had a job? She lied to you just like she lied to me. And now, you've been fired. So how will you support each other now?" Their faces twisted in shock and horror, and it felt like I was finally free from the chains that had kept me in for so long. "Congratulations on your wedding," I said, a wicked smile on my face. "I hope you enjoy every single moment of it." I turned to Michael, intending to leave, but he stopped me, reaching into his pocket. My heart skipped a beat as he dropped to one knee right there in front of everyone, holding out a ring that sparkled brighter than anything I'd ever seen. "Alina," he said, his voice filled with love, "will you marry me?" I nodded with a shaky smile. "Yes, Michael. 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and as he rose, I leaned into him, letting him pull me close. Our lips met in a kiss, soft and tender, but filled with every bit of love we'd both waited so long to share. We turned, hand in hand, and walked out of that hall together, leaving Daniel and Claire in the ruins of their own making. Finally, I was free, and for the first time, I was truly happy. Thanks for watching. If it were you, what would you do to Daniel and Claire? Subscribe if you like the story.